He was a hero, not in a figurative sense, but a real, tangible hero to a global community that revered him. This is Leandro Lo, an 8-time world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a man celebrated not just for his impossible-to-pass guard, but for a calm and joyful demeanor that inspired thousands. He was a living legend at the absolute peak of his craft. This is Henrique Otávio Oliveira Veloso, a military police officer in São Paulo, a man who swore an oath to protect the public. His job was to be a guardian of order, a symbol of the state's authority to maintain peace. One night, inside a crowded nightclub, their paths crossed in a moment of trivial conflict. It ended with the champion Leandro Lo shot in the head at point-blank range. For over 3 years, the world watched and waited for justice. The case seemed clear: an off-duty officer, an unarmed victim, and a sea of witnesses. The charge was triple qualified homicide, an accusation reserved for the most heinous of crimes. But on November 14, 2025, after a trial filled with delays and drama, the 7 members of a São Paulo jury delivered a verdict that few saw coming. The champion is still gone, and the police officer who killed him now walks free. How could this happen? How does a case that begins with such brutal clarity end in an acquittal that defies belief? This is the story of a champion's death, a fractured justice system, and a family's desperate final fight for an answer. Was this self-defense, or did a police officer get away with murder? To understand the depth of the shock and outrage that followed the verdict, you first have to understand who Leandro Lo was. He wasn't just another athlete. Within the world of martial arts, he was royalty. Born in 1989 in São Paulo, Brazil, Lo began his jiu-jitsu journey as a teenager. By the time of his death, he had achieved a level of success that few will ever touch. He was an 8-time IBJJF world champion. To put that into perspective, it's like winning 8 Super Bowls or 8 Wimbledon titles. But what made it even more remarkable was that he won these titles across 5 different weight classes, a feat of longevity and adaptability that is almost unparalleled in the sport's history. His style was legendary. He was known for his guard, a defensive and offensive position from his back that was considered virtually impassable. For years, the best grapplers in the world tried to solve the puzzle of Leandro Lo's guard, and for years, they failed. But his greatness wasn't just in his technique. It was in his character. In a sport defined by controlled aggression, Lo was known for his infectious smile and his humble, approachable nature. He was a leader who, in 2015, co-founded his own team, the NS Brotherhood, or New School Brotherhood. The name itself was a reflection of his philosophy, a team built on camaraderie and mutual support. He had the name Brotherhood tattooed across his chest. He was a mentor to a new generation of athletes, a figure who represented the best of what the sport was supposed to be, a path to discipline, respect, and self-improvement. He was not known as a troublemaker. On the contrary, friends, family, and competitors consistently described him as calm and composed, a man who avoided conflict off the mats. He was at the height of his powers, a 33-year-old icon who had already conquered the world multiple times over and was still competing at the highest level. He was, by all accounts, a man with everything to live for. A man who, on a late Saturday night in August 2022, went out to a concert with friends, never to return. The date was August 7th, 2022. The place was the Club Sirio, a well-known club in the southern zone of São Paulo. A popular pagode band was playing, and the atmosphere was lively. Leandro Lo was there with a group of friends, enjoying a night off from the grueling demands of his profession. Also in attendance was Henrique Veloso, an off-duty military police lieutenant. According to multiple witness statements compiled by investigators, the incident began with a seemingly minor provocation. Veloso, who was at another table, allegedly approached Lo's table, picked up a bottle, and began gesturing with it in a threatening manner. To de-escalate the situation, Lo, an expert in controlling confrontations without causing harm, reportedly took Veloso to the ground and held him in a restraining position. He didn't strike him. He simply subdued him, neutralizing the threat. After calming Veloso down, Lo's friends intervened, urging Lo to let him go. Believing the conflict was over, Lo agreed and released him. What happened next is the critical moment that would be debated for 3 years. Witnesses stated that after getting to his feet, Veloso took a few steps back, pulled out a concealed firearm, and fired a single shot directly into Leandro Lo's forehead. The champion collapsed, and he would be declared brain dead hours later. But Veloso's actions allegedly didn't stop there. According to reports cited in the case, he then walked up to the fallen, unconscious Lo and kicked him twice in the head before turning and walking away from the scene. As a police officer, he was legally and morally obligated to render aid and call for an ambulance. Instead, he fled. Hours later, after the news had exploded across Brazil and he was declared a fugitive, Henrique Veloso turned himself into the police's internal affairs department. From the very beginning, the facts seemed damning. A world-renowned martial artist known for his calm demeanor had used his skills not to injure, but to restrain a provocateur. In response, the provocateur, a police officer, had executed him. The act of kicking an already dying man on the ground seemed to be an act of pure contempt, something far removed from any claim of fear or self-defense. To the public, to Lo's family, and to the global jiu-jitsu community, this didn't look like a fight that went wrong. It looked like a cold-blooded murder the Brazilian justice system now had to decide. The charge leveled against Henrique Veloso was severe: homicidio triplamente qualificado, or triple qualified homicide. In the Brazilian legal system, this isn't a simple murder charge. It means the crime was aggravated by specific heinous circumstances. The prosecution argued for 3 qualifiers: a vile motive, suggesting the act was born of pettiness; the use of means that made it impossible for the victim to defend himself, as Lo was shot after the physical confrontation had ended; and creating a public danger by firing a weapon inside a crowded nightclub. A conviction on these charges could carry a sentence of up to 30 years in prison. Initially, the wheels of justice seemed to be turning. Veloso was arrested and held in the Romão Gomes military prison, a facility reserved for law enforcement personnel. However, the straightforward narrative of the crime soon bogged down in a legal and bureaucratic quagmire that would drag on for over 3 years. The trial was hit with a series of deliberate delays, a tactic often employed by defense teams in Brazil. The first major postponement came in May 2025, when Veloso's lawyers filed a last-minute injunction, successfully arguing the judge was unfairly preventing their expert witnesses from testifying. But the most shocking development during this long wait had to do with Veloso's employment. He had previously been dismissed from the military police by the governor of São Paulo. However, in October 2025, just a month before the final trial date, his defense team successfully appealed. A judge reinstated him to the force, arguing that he retained the full rights of an officer until a final conviction was reached. The result was staggering. Veloso, while being held in a military prison awaiting trial for murder, was again entitled to his full monthly salary, paid for by the public he was accused of harming to Leandro Lo's family and supporters. This was a profound insult. It felt as though the system was already protecting one of its own, signaling that justice for an officer was different from justice for a regular citizen. The lawyer for Lo's family described a previous, similar ruling on his salary as a slap in the face of the family and of society. This cemented a growing fear that the path to a conviction was going to be far more difficult than anyone had imagined. When the trial finally commenced on November 12, 2025, the courtroom in São Paulo became the stage for a dramatic confrontation. Over 3 intense days, the prosecution and defense presented 2 entirely different realities of what happened at Clube Serio 9. Witnesses were heard, including friends of Lo, club employees, and finally, Henrique Veloso himself. The prosecution built their case around the eyewitness accounts. They painted a picture of Veloso as the aggressor who, after being embarrassed by being subdued, retaliated with lethal force. Their argument was that the fight was over, Lo had let him go. The subsequent shooting was therefore not self-defense, but an act of revenge. They emphasized Veloso's actions after the shot, fleeing the scene and kicking Lo's head as he lay dying, actions they argued were incompatible with legitimate self-defense. The defense, led by attorney Claudio Dalladoni, launched an aggressive attack designed to create doubt in the minds of the 7 jurors. Their core argument was simple. Self-defense Dalladone portrayed Veloso as a victim who was terrified of the world champion martial artist. During pre-trial hearings, the defense had tried to introduce the idea that Lo's friends were large and intimidating, and even suggested Lo had been smoking marijuana, a claim for which the lead detective testified there was no evidence. This strategy of painting the victim as the aggressor continued in the main trial. The defense highlighted minor contradictions in witness testimonies to undermine their credibility. The climax of the trial came on the final day, November 14th, when Henrique Veloso took the stand. For the first time, he gave his own account of the events. He spoke of fear, of intimidation, and of a decision he claimed he was forced to make, presenting himself not as a trained police officer who lost his temper, but as a cornered individual who believed his life was in danger. As the jury left to deliberate, 2 irreconcilable stories hung in the air. One was of a beloved champion, a peacemaker who was executed for diffusing a conflict. The other was of a police officer, terrified and cornered, who acted in self-defense. The complexities of this case highlight a justice system under intense scrutiny. These are the kinds of stories we are committed to exploring, digging deep into the evidence and asking the tough questions. If you believe in this kind of in-depth analysis and want to follow more investigations like this one, please take a moment to subscribe. It's the single best way to support our work and ensure these important stories continue to be told. Now, let's get back to the verdict. The wait for the jury's decision was not long. After 3 years of delays, the final deliberation was surprisingly quick. On the evening of November 14, 2025, the 7 jurors returned to the courtroom. Leandro Lo's mother, Fatima, sat with her family, hoping for a conviction that felt, to them, like a certainty. Henrique Veloso stood, awaiting the verdict that would either send him to prison for decades or set him free. The foreman of the jury stood and delivered the decision. In the case of the state versus Henrique Otavio Oliveira Veloso, the jury found the defendant not guilty. Veloso was acquitted of all charges. A wave of shock and disbelief washed over the courtroom. According to reports, at least 4 of the 7 jurors had accepted the defense's argument. They believed Veloso had acted in legitimate self-defense. The detailed witness testimonies, the act of kicking Lo after the shot, the flight from the scene, none of it had been enough to secure a conviction. The jury had chosen to believe Veloso's narrative of fear over the prosecution's narrative of malice. Moments after the verdict was read, Henrique Veloso, the man who had shot and killed Leandro Lo, was a free man. He was released from custody that night, walking out of the courthouse after more than 3 years in a military prison. His defense attorney triumphantly declared the verdict a triumph of justice over arbitrariness. But for Lo's family and the entire jiu-jitsu community, it felt like the exact opposite. The system they had placed their faith in for 3 long years had failed them in the most devastating way possible. The man who killed their son, their hero, their friend, was free. The question that echoed across social media and in jiu-jitsu academies worldwide was a simple one. How is this justice? In the wake of the acquittal, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Grief and outrage poured out from the global BJJ community, which had followed the case with obsessive attention. For them, this wasn't just a legal failing. it was a moral one. The verdict felt like a declaration that the life of one of their most revered figures had little value in the eyes of the law, especially when weighed against the word of a police officer. But the most profound pain was reserved for Lo's family, particularly his mother, Fatima Lo. Her fight for justice had become a public crusade. After the verdict, she spoke to the press, her words conveying a depth of pain that was hard to comprehend. She described the trial experience as humiliating, stating that she felt as though she had buried her son twice. She criticized a justice system that she felt had allowed the defendant to lie freely, while her son was no longer there to tell his side of the story. In the years following her son's death, she also had to fight to protect his legacy, speaking out against former associates who were allegedly misusing Leandro's name and the NS Brotherhood brand he had built. She had been fighting on all fronts to protect her son's memory. Now, facing the ultimate legal defeat, she made a solemn promise. She announced that the family would appeal the decision. There was no justice, she told reporters. The prosecution team supported her, expressing confidence that such a verdict, which they saw as contrary to the overwhelming evidence, would be overturned on appeal. And so, the case is not entirely over. It now enters a new, even more uncertain phase. The appeal process is long and arduous, but for Fatima Lo, it is the only path forward. Her fight is no longer just for her son, but for a principle. It's a fight against a verdict that has shaken public trust and left a community feeling that justice is not blind, but biased. In this case, in favor of a man with a badge. So we are left where we began. A champion is dead, a police officer walks free. The verdict of self-defense stands in stark, unsettling contrast to witness accounts of an execution followed by an act of contempt. It is a conclusion that has left a permanent scar on the sport of jiu-jitsu and raised deeply troubling questions about the Brazilian justice system. Was Henrique Veloso truly a man in fear for his life, forced to make a terrible split-second decision? Or was he a man whose ego, bruised after being controlled by a superior martial artist, led him to commit an act of vengeful violence? A man who then used his status and a flawed system to escape the consequences? The jury has made its decision. But for a global community, for a grieving family, and for a mother who has vowed to never stop fighting, the verdict is not an answer. It is an injustice. What do you think? Was this a case of legitimate self-defense, or was this a profound failure of the justice system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.